Go ahead.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Sullivan. I'm the chair of the Oregon Board of Accountancy. I'm calling this special Zoom only public meeting of the State of Oregon Board of Accountancy to order. Today is Wednesday, November 6th, and it is 12:02 p.m. This meeting is being held by Zoom with staff participating at the board offices on 200 Hawthorne Avenue Southeast, Suite D450, Salem, Oregon, 97301. This meeting is being recorded. For all Zoom participants, please be sure to mute your microphone and unmute only when you are called upon to speak. Please do not use the chat room for any discussions. Should any technical issues arise, the meeting will be paused until they are resolved. I'll now take a quick roll call, and I'll just call them out as I see them on Zoom on my screen. So again, Joe Sullivan, board chair. Andrew
Barlow, board staff.
Okay, Quinn
Stoddard, board staff.
Perfect. Amanda
Fells, OAIA representative.
Okay, Raul
Yeah, board vice chair.
Angie
Hunt, board legal counsel.
Martin
Piccioni, executive director.
Megan
Hartley, board member.
Jason Orm. Okay.
You're on mute.
So, yeah, I was on mute. I couldn't get off. Jason Orm, Laws and Rules Committee Chair.
All right, thank you, Jason. Mike Mead.
Mike Mead, managing principal of CLA, guest community member, CPA.
Perfect. Thanks for joining, Mike. Logan
Steele, board member.
Thank you. Haley
Lyons, board member.
Sherry
McPherson, Oregon Society of CPAs.
Thanks for joining, Sherry. Adam
There we go. Adam Applenau, vice chair of the OSCPA by Zoom.
Yeah, thanks for joining, Adam. Jason Robinson,
board treasurer via Zoom.
Okay. Thanks, Jason. Dominic
Franzella, executive officer for the California Board of Accountancy.
Okay, Dominic, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, Rachel
Reardon, PwC.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Appreciate you joining us as well. I think that's everybody. Andrew, is there anybody I missed?
No, that's everyone.
Okay, perfect. We'll now go on to item number 2, the agenda review and approval. So I assume everybody's had a chance to review the agenda. So, unless there's any proposed changes, could I call for a motion to approve and adopt the agenda as presented?
I move to approve and adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none. Abstentions? Hearing none. Motion passes. Right. Okay, we'll move on to item number 3, public comment. So if there's any members of the public who wish to comment, please raise your hand in the room or use the Zoom raise hand feature. If I call on you for comment, you will be permitted to address the board for a maximum of 3 minutes, and staff will unmute you so you can speak. As chair, I do reserve the right to end your comment early and have staff mute you if your comment does not pertain to the authority given to this board by the legislature to regulate the CPA profession and public accountancy firms in this state. So is there any public comment at this time? And I'm not seeing any. All right, so we will keep on moving then. So we're going to move on to item number 4, which is the chair report, which I just have one item today, or I guess I'll start by saying I thank you to both Martin and Haley for attending the NASBA meeting. What was it, a week ago? Thank you for taking the time to do that. I look forward to hearing kind of more about that. I know there's lots going on, so I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to do that. I know there's a lot going on, so thank you again. Outside of that, the only thing, at least for today, is just looking to potentially change our next meeting. Right now it's on our calendars for Thursday, December 12th. I'm hoping everyone can kind of open up their calendars right now. We're going to look to see if we can change the dates, if we have some flexibility here. The primary purpose is to accommodate Angie's schedule. I think that's important to have her at our next meeting. And so there's some potential dates here that I think we can do, which would be December 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, or the 6th. Let's see.
Then we also have December 9 and 10 or 16th,
Yeah.
19 on offer.
Yeah, sorry, I was just so we have the 9th, the 10th, and then the 16th through the 19th. So there's kind of quite a few dates there. And let's see. I'm just trying to see. As far as dates on my end, I'm pretty open. So does anybody have any thoughts as far as dates that would work for them?
I have a lot of conflicts throughout that period. I think this would be best done through a doodle poll, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say I have a lot of conflicts in that the only two dates that actually work well for me are the 3rd and the 18th.
So the 3rd and the 18th?
Anyone have direct conflicts with either the 3rd or the 18th?
Probably the 3rd is out for me, but we're doing interviews to hire folks, and that's a whole day thing.
What about
I
the
would agree. I
18th?
can't do the 3rd. I have something on the 18th, but I could move it. I could make the 18th work.
Sounds like we have a replacement date, but I will do better. And especially now that we have, you know, folks like Quinn on staff, we'll do this on a Google poll next time and not waste board meeting time.
I think we're pretty close. I can do the 18th. Haley can, Megan can, if she's willing to move something. Raul, how about you?
I think I can. I just, we're going for a week, but somewhere in December, but I had always planned to be at the meeting, any meeting we have via Zoom. We're going to be in Texas. So I plan to be there. Just that I'm trying to figure out if the 18th we're over there or not. My wife has those dates. I don't have them in front of me. But we could tentatively do it there.
Similar.
Okay.
I think that'll be good.
Hopefully we don't want to interfere with a vacation. So
It's sort of, but I had planned to be at the meeting, whatever date it was.
okay.
So
Well, I
it's no
think
big deal.
that's the date where we can get the best attendance right there. And again, I think it's important we have Angie present. So should we plan for that date?
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
All right. So let's go ahead and do that. I don't think we need a motion for that, do we?
Nope. We'll take it from
Okay.
here.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the flexibility. And so let's just mark that on our calendar for now. And we'll keep moving. So moving on to item 5, new business. So 5A, overview of the developments since the September 26th board meeting. So item number 1 is the UAA exposure draft release from September 30th, 2024. So Martin, you want to kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting two-step, if you look at the overall materials, right? So the way this is framed is like this is the stuff that's new since the board meeting. So I think the best way to introduce it is that you may recall that in your September board meetings, you had exposure draft materials, but they were not what's actually on here, right? Because they were a different exposure draft, because NASBA and AICPA essentially chose to go down the road of having two separate exposure draft. One was in your September board meeting materials, and you have those materials in the, inside what we sent out for this meeting again. So what you originally had was the exposure draft on the licensure pathway, which was essentially an exposure draft with respect, going into detail on multiple slides. There was no language attached to it per se, kind of describing the additional licensure pathway proposal that the NASBA Professional Licensure Task Force had come up with, right? That part we had at the board meeting time on the 26th. What came out, a few business days later was the connected UAA exposure draft. And the UAA exposure draft essentially laid out the kind of mobility substantial equivalency side of where NASBA and AICPA are exposing comments. There are two slightly different comment periods. One is due on the 6th, the other one is due on the 30th. But the reality is that those two are really linked. And essentially on the UAA side, which gets a little bit jumps ahead into the potential comment that we may have that you have as a draft in front of you. Essentially, it's really only through that second exposure that occurred right after our board meeting that it really kind of became directly clear and relevant that the proposals that NASBA was exposing on the licensure side were effectively linked to the UAA Model Act amendments on the substantial equivalency mobility side. More specifically, essentially that draft is essentially proposing that unless you essentially adopt the exact version of the licensure pathway as NASBA proposed, that you may not end up being in a substantially equivalent territory anymore. And essentially the linkage between the two really causes some, quite frankly, it changes things, right? Because especially for us in Oregon, if you just look at the licensure pathway side, you get to some very familiar sounding themes that actually should warm our hearts because it's a lot of what we do in Oregon, but it's the exposure draft that came out on September 30th after our board meeting that essentially really changes the equation because it puts it into this overall context of unless you do this, we may not be considered, unless a jurisdiction does this, it will not be considered substantial equivalent with all the consequent threats to mobility. So that's essentially the new piece that came out. It was kind of unfortunate timing for us that those two things, one came, before the board meeting, one came after the board meeting, but they're really linked. So we basically decided, can we have one conversation now? So that's really kind of my super high level summary of where that UAA exposure draft is at, and it also has that element of the of an accountancy national accountancy database that is proposed to track like which CPAs are coming up through what licensure pathway in order to determine who may have mobility privileges and who may not. That's, I think, the most neutral way that I would try to describe that part of the proposal. So I'll stop there. That's essentially where that's the new part that came out after the board meeting.
You don't have to be neutral when you describe it, but just saying. Thank you, Martin. Appreciate that. And then any questions from the board or anyone else? Not hearing any. Okay. Let's keep moving. So item number 2, which is the report from the AICPA Council. So I think Jason Orm and Sherry, I think maybe you're going to lead us through this one.
We'll lead, it'll be pretty quick. What Martin's talked about, they talked about too. There were comments that were pretty strong about, gee, we want to preserve mobility, we want to preserve reciprocity. We actually had roundtable discussions with regard to the licensure path. And I had read what our proposed legislation, what we do currently versus the exposure draft on the airplane out. And what we do in the state of Oregon is actually at a higher level. It's more stringent than what's being proposed. So their proposal for us still is less than what we require by rule. That's the quick executive summary. Sherry, anything of significance that I missed? And Sherry's sitting in SeaTac waiting for an aircraft back to Portland. So
Jason and I collaborated, so we basically had the same report. So Jason jumped in, so it's quieter in the background. Thank you, everybody. But there's still that pressure to step back. But you know, NASBA has met since AICPA Council has met. So I think really Martin's going to have probably the most current boots on the ground comment at this point.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jason. Thank you, Sherry. Questions? Not hearing any. And then I'll keep moving. Item number 3, kind of as I mentioned in my board report, we had the NASBA meeting that Martin and Haley attended. So now's a kind of chance to hear some more details and an update from that meeting.
Haley, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, it's similar, Sherry. I think there is pressure, and Jason, pressure to stand down, if you will. And that's coming from leadership, and yet the membership base is like, yeah, we're not doing that. And so there's definitely a disconnect between what the powers that be want to have happen and what is actually going to happen. So, you know, there's though a strong sentiment that, you know, people are aligned and wanting to maintain mobility, but are trying to figure out what's the best path forward for their licensees or on the society side. And I don't mean to speak out of turn, but, you know, for the membership there. I didn't get a strong sense that there is really anybody that is, well, I shouldn't say that. I got a strong sense that there is dissatisfaction with the both exposure drafts, that they're not where we need to be from a preservation of mobility standpoint. From an Oregon perspective, Jason, totally agree with your comment about, you know, what we're doing is more stringent. And the difference is that we've never required anybody else to do what we're doing to allow them to be substantially equivalent in our state. And so, as you, I'm sure all saw in the comments back, we're addressing that. So it's, there was definitely a strange for me, having not had a lot of NASBA interaction, but there was this sort of strange disconnect between what, you know, speakers in the meeting were talking about and what the EDs and state board members were planning, and that they're not in alignment, which is a bit frightening. And then particularly frightening is when there are states who are not as fortunate as we are to have such a good alignment with our society. And, you know, there are states that are having societies put forth legislation that the, you know, board hasn't seen, and because they're just sick of it and they're ready to move forward. So, yeah, I think there were lots of really good conversations had, and I think coming out of it, there's some element of what's the solution, and Martin could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Haley. And I think that was a really great summary. There isn't too much that I have to add to it. I wish I could tell you that there was some brilliant breakthrough at the executive director's level. There was not. I would simply say there is a recognition, which I think is what the last part of what Haley just talked about, and that was a very direct feedback also given in some of the more intimate sessions to NASBA, that there is a simple reality that jurisdictions aren't just in that place that Haley described around, hey, some of us have great relationships with societies, others, have no idea what their societies are going to propose in their legislature, right? But there's also that other layer that, quite frankly, if you look at the licensure exposure pathway, right, for those jurisdictions, which are a lot of jurisdictions, that currently do not have supervision standards the way we do, what it effectively is, it's raising the bar, otherwise known as raising standards in an environment that in many states is anti-regulatory, which means that, our jurisdictions fall not just in the category of who would like to go in that direction, but there's quite frankly quite a few that simply can't, because the political environment in those states will not allow it, right? And so there is kind of this recognition that this is going to be a really, really rough, if it's not going to be an aspirational, essentially amendments to the UAA that with respect to supervision standards that states can embrace as they're ready and as their political environment allows, that it's just not realistic to effectively turn it into unless you do it, bad things could happen to mobility kind of a place. And so I have to say the only other thing I can report back is that there is still voices that we're hearing around, well, let's just hit the reset button if the comments to these exposure drafts don't come back in a positive way. I think there are some folks in leadership that are still thinking that there's a chance that those could come back positively. And then there's others who are kind of more open to the notion that would not happen. But even if that's the case, it's like, okay, well, we'll figure out the next steps when that happens. And that's really kind of where one of the other parts of the problem here lies, is that the trains are leaving the station and we don't really have a good response at the national level yet. And that's really the most fundamental problem that's also started to, quite frankly, pop up, not just at the conference, but, and we're on Zoom here, so I can't really directly look at anybody, but I'm trying to avoid a direct look at Megan here, right? Because her firm is one of the ones, popping up in, major publications. And I'm not saying this critically, I'm just saying this as a statement of fact, saying, hey, there's a problem here. And, I think there were now 2 of the big 4 that have come out publicly. I think one is Deloitte. I forget who the other one is, that basically said, I'm sorry?
I think it's KPMG.
KPMG, yes, thank you. So it's Deloitte and KPMG that have since, very publicly come out in places like Accounting Today, Wall Street Journal, and say, we just need a clean addition of a 120+2 pathway without these additional supervision standards, and let's figure out a way to preserve mobility. And that's, that's kind of where we are.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Haley. So obviously a lot going on, probably an eventful meeting. And I think I told you that was the first time I felt like I was missing out for not being there. So anyway, we'll keep on moving. Item number 4. So finalization of our legislative concept 299. So a lot of work went into that. Martin, you just want to cover that briefly? I know I'm putting that lightly, but a ton of work went into that.
Yeah, and I'll keep it super brief because this is actually kind of an awkward moment right now, because literally I'm confined because of the way the process works for agency bills to simple report on status, which is that we actually finished the back end process of working with Legislative Council, and the final draft is essentially in the process now. There's a ton of work that I think Angie really needs some recognition for, because she really was an exceptionally effective advocate for what we need in there with Legislative Council. And we, quite frankly, I think we ended up with the very best drafter in that office who was more responsive and gave us more opportunities for back and forth than I've seen in decades of working with Legislative Council. So we kind of lucked out both on the Angie side as well as on the Legislative Council side. The awkward part is, you may have noticed it's not in our materials. Well, technically, right now, I'm not supposed to share it because it's, none of it is fully public until the governor signs off on, kind of goes through the final review process. That's kind of what happens with agency bills. You've seen a lot of the earlier drafts, so I can assure you there's no surprises in terms of what you're going to see, right? But I couldn't quite, actually throw this thing right now out into the public domain of a board meeting without, failing to meet some process expectations. So the good news is, December 1 is really kind of the key date. Our board meeting is after December 1. That means at that point, we can talk about what's in our governor's budget. At that point, we can talk about our bill stuff, even more openly. And obviously, we have an opportunity to talk about the bill at the town hall, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this on the agenda. But that's kind of where we're at. So just know we're solid. There's a beautiful amount of work. Thank you all. Thank you to the LRC. Thank you to this board, and especially thank you, Angie, for being a fantastic advocate for us in this in this process. And thank you to our stakeholders for backing it all the way. It's a tough process, and everybody pulled together.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. And yeah, I just wanted to add too, thank you, Angie, for all the work you put into that. Jason Orm, thank you for leading the LRC and all the work that went into that. I know that's a big lift. And so to get to this point is pretty exciting. So thank you, everyone. That is it for 5A. So now we can jump into 5B, kind of the meat here, which is the work session. So now we can kind of jump into a discussion of the exposure draft on the licensure competency pathway and the new UAA exposure draft and our draft response. And so I think you have in your materials draft response. I think everybody, correct? See some nodding heads. Yes. Okay. So that appreciate, Martin. Thank you for taking the lead. We've talked about this prior to the board meeting, kind of on an overall approach to this, rather than going kind of on a question by question basis. We took it as let's take one approach, since they're kind of intertwined. It is a little bit less work, but I think they're so integrated. It makes more sense to kind of combine it into one response. So Martin kind of did the initial pass, and then Haley and I both took a first pass at some edits. I know Haley has some great suggestions as well. So thank you, Haley, for doing that. So now it's kind of our chance for the whole board to take a look, ask questions, provide any additional comments, make changes as we see it. So kind of I'll open it up now for any questions or comments.
Just overall, fantastic draft. I think I would not have any significant changes to what's written. But yeah, thank you. A commendable effort, I think. I'm curious if other board members have any, substantive changes they have in mind, but I have none.
Yeah.
Thanks, Logan. Is there anything more on the minor side that stands out to you that you're saying, hey, can you tweak this, or you forgot a word there, or is this really about reciprocity rather than mobility? You know, because those concepts can be very confusing, quite frankly, even for folks that have been around the regulatory setting, let alone, you know, the broader community, which is one of the things we need to deal with at the town hall, is basically go back over what's the difference between reciprocity and mobility. And this is, you know, ties straight into that. But is there anything that stood out to you that was more minor?
No, I guess I did read it for, you know, overall, take, I'd say. But wordsmithing, something like that. Yeah, I cannot opine if there's changes on that dimension.
Yeah, I feel similarly about this draft. I mean, I think that it's well written and appreciate all the work that went into it. And I don't really have any comment or follow up or questions.
Okay. I'd also be curious, just based on our guests today, they probably don't have. I guess they probably don't have a draft in front of them if they have any comments on it as well. Either Dominic or Rachel, but they probably don't have that, right, Martin?
Yeah, absolutely. We can call on anyone that we wish to as part of this discussion.
Yeah, I just don't know if they have it in their materials, do they?
I think Dominic has it for sure. I think Rachel got it from me yesterday, if I remember correctly. I'm trying to keep track because I send out so many emails, but yes.
I did get it from you yesterday, Martin. Thank you.
And
okay.
Yeah, so I'll stop there.
Okay. Yeah, I just either Rachel or Dominic, I'd just be curious if you had any thoughts or comments. You know, appreciate that you're taking the time to be here. So would love to hear any thoughts on your end as well.
So yeah, thank you, Martin, and thank you, Chair Sullivan. I appreciate you giving us an opportunity. I did review it. Oregon's definitely taken a different path. California did respond independently to both of the exposure drafts. When we sent ours out yesterday, I had an opportunity yesterday evening to share with Martin our position, but we have a slightly different take on the competency-based experience, just because obviously we're not integrated into our experience requirements similar to Oregon's. But as it relates to mobility, I think we have a similar kind of take, which is that's kind of the key here in maintaining minimizing the disruption and maintaining as much ability for mobility to be preserved is important. And our final take on it in California was basically to pause on anything related to the competency-based experience until such time as they could address. We identified several concerns that they could identify and address those concerns. And as for the UAA, we asked them to pause on any future discussion on the licensure piece and focus on mobility and getting something put in place that states could agree to from a mobility standpoint. So that's where California ended yesterday. And I think this letter kind of carries that same message. When it's all said and done, mobility needs to be preserved. The licensure piece will work itself out.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that a lot, Dominic. And just, I don't know if it was clear in terms of what all I sent out, but the California response is that the initial draft response, which is very similar from what I understand to what actually went out, is part of our materials. And just to be really clear, you're absolutely right that there is a different positioning between California and Oregon around the supervised experience piece. But the whole point here is that what I think our response is trying to capture is to essentially recognize that there has to be room for different jurisdictions to take a different approach as to whether or when they embrace, a different approach to the supervised experience without that harming, essentially the mobility framework. And so in that sense, I think we're very much still, even though we're coming at this from different places on a supervised experience, and I still feel like, on the stuff that really matters, California and Oregon and ultimately, I don't want to really speak for Washington, are aligned, right? Because we're really aligning around the mobility piece.
Quick point about that. I did note in reviewing the California board meeting and their letter and kind of their aspirations. There are a few differences. I think most notably, and Dominic, you can correct me if I'm wrong, a relaxation of the 120 credit requirement, even with the bachelor, just leaving behind the 5-year education requirement. The California board was considering removing the credit requirement. They'd only have a bachelor's degree, which could be earned maybe in 3 years. So the larger point is I can see some issues arising with the education requirements varying across states, as well as the competency requirements.
Yeah, in California, we moved off of units entirely, and are moving to the focus on the degree. And to some extent, the competency-based path work does the same. It does, the exposed model that the UAA offered doesn't have a unit requirement associated with this baccalaureate plus 1+1 or +2, whatever they're calling it on a given day. So the competency-based experience is also without units, but yeah, we've pulled back on the units in California.
Yeah, and Logan, I will say that there was actually quite a bit of discussion. Maybe it was in the board meeting. I don't now remember where, but in the confines of the NASBA group, that about the notion of a 3-year bachelor's degree or a 90 credit hour bachelor's, and that, like Dominic saying, that to the extent that people may or may not have a competency-based pathway, or like what they've exposed in the UAA, that's how I think the UAA committee reconciled that, was to say, well, we've still got this 2-year experience piece that goes with it. Now, the whole like halvesies on competency-based and non-competency-based is silly, but it, for lack of a better term, it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, this month I'm going to do things that make me a competent CPA, and this month I'm not. It seems a little bit far-reaching. So that was sort of the reconciliation piece, I think, on that. Now, we do run the risk, for lack of a better term, as we move away from, as we're suggesting, moving away from kind of a mandated competency-based supervision piece, that there could be licensees in other states that are getting a bachelor's degree in 3 years. The thing that I come back to on that is, a lot of times, we're looking, initial licensure is only one component of the profession, and continued licensure in states, and that becomes a whole other thing for folks coming into our state. That I think we focus a lot on that initial licensure, and sometimes can, fail to see the forest of the trees in terms of the body of licensees that we have out there that we want to make sure can move around.
Yeah, thank you, Haley. Appreciate those comments. Yeah, and I guess I would say too, for me, the kind of in this draft, the paragraph that really kind of summarizes kind of what we're trying to message is like the 2A, we're essentially, the I guess I'll just read it, the idea embraced by the ACPA NASBA leadership that jurisdictions moving toward a 120+2 approach would not be substantially equivalent to 150+1 is not supported by this board. The board trusts the actions of their peer regulators and is of the mindset that how a candidate obtained their initial licensure should not weigh into their ability to obtain a license in Oregon or to obtain practice privileges mobility in Oregon. This board would prefer to simply look to see that the candidate has a CPA license and not how they got that initial license. That kind of sums it up pretty well in my mind. Everyone okay with that?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. I have no comments on that. I also recognize that paragraph too, Joe.
Yeah. Sherry, I know you're in a tough spot to speak, but any comments, or Adam, anything from the OSCPA?
I can weigh in that the board has, let me take my headset off. I am not yelling maybe.
Having a hard time hearing you, Sherry.
Very well. Took the headset off. We can't hear you.
I'm back in and just try to be quiet.
I think we lost her.
Okay.
Oh,
Adam,
no.
any comments while we wait
yeah.
to get her back? Yeah.
Well, she tries to rejoin. Like, she may have some more substantive comments. I mean, I generally, like, from my own perspective and my understanding of what we've discussed at the OSCPA board, I am fully on board with the board, you know, this response and the position that the board is taking. And I think it's the right approach. I had just a couple of, like, kind of clarification, maybe stylistic type things that I wanted to throw out. Is that okay? Or is that?
Sorry, that was effective.
Okay. Hey, Sherry, I was just given a little bit of, I had a couple of real quick comments, and then we were going to come back to you for more substantive stuff. No, you're good. So my two comments are just that paragraph, Joe, that you just read. I think that it could be a little more straightforward if we said just a little more active. This board does not support the idea embraced by AICPA and NASBA leaderships that jurisdictions, that sentence, it's the action word is like at the end as opposed to putting it at the beginning. And then my other comment was in 1A. I think that first, let me find where it was. Or sorry, it's 1B, paragraph 1B. That first sentence has like a triple negative, and I think there's a way to flip it around so it's a little clearer. I followed what you're saying there, and I think all of us do because we've been so involved in this discussion. But my only thought is if this is, you know, I don't, maybe the intention isn't for this to be kind of an open letter or like an open, you know, letter back to the NASBA. But if other practitioners are looking at this, especially in context of what Martin talked about with our town hall on Friday, I think more clarity there is really helpful. I totally agree with the point of it. I think that maybe there's a way to flip some of those around a little bit and even make it a little more assertive that this is how the board feels, as opposed to it comes off as a little passive in the way it's currently written. So, but again, like, I think substantively, I think we're totally agreed there. It's just maybe a little bit of how the message is conveyed. And again, more for the public. Yeah.
No, thanks, Adam. That's good feedback. I agree with that. Martin, are those edits that you're comfortable making?
I am, and I do want to point out in my defense, part of what happens here is still a cross-cultural transition because I grew up in a language that puts the verbs at the end, and sometimes that still catches up to me in English, and means that things are at the end that really need to be at the beginning, and it's an ongoing, decades-long process, and it's an excellent point, Adam.
Okay, Sherry, I know, thank you for finishing that thought.
Oh my gosh. I'm embarrassed. I've never like popped myself out of a meeting before. So just so you know, I mean, I'm comfortable with what's here. Obviously, I wouldn't ever speak on behalf of Board of Accountancy, but one of the things that we talked about, and the reason Jason's commented on council is because Jason is on AICPA council as OSCPA's 3-year designated rep. So looking at that, we talked about the fact that, you know, and it's unofficial for our board because again, it's my chair-elect, and of course our council member that were there in attendance, but we talked about the importance of being aligned with the Board of Accountancy on the exposure draft response. Our board will be meeting on the 21st, so we'll be certainly taking a look at this. Martin and I have been hip to hip in the process, so I appreciate any strength in response or any changes that might come between now and our board meeting, even after the exposure draft, I'm very comfortable with. And again, we've talked about how important it is that we stay in lockstep and aligned with this. One thing that does concern me a little bit is that I've been through lots of exposure drafts for UAA, et cetera, over the years. And I know that there's some boards of accountancy, possibly maybe some societies that are not responding just because, you know, it's like maybe a little like, well, I don't like all of this, so I'm not going to respond. I worry that that might be an indirect vote. I put that in quotes of, oh, we accept because we're not complaining about this. So I really appreciate the effort on this, Martin. And anyway, look forward to those next steps. If there's anything that comes out of our discussion, I'm certainly happy to reach back to Martin and connect those dots together.
Sure, I'll just add an editorial comment that there's definitely boards of accountancy that are planning on not responding because they're just sort of sick of the process and throwing their hands in the air. I'm glad that's not the approach we're taking. There was a lot of talking points around please comment, even if you please comment, especially if you have positive things to say. And so I think that at least the tenor on the potentially on the NASBA side is that the lack of comment, you know, may be misconstrued as positive. But I think that would be that would be a poor assumption, because that's not the feedback that I'm hearing, is that people who aren't commenting because they're happy about it. They're not commenting because they're, you know, questioning the transparency of the process, and they're questioning the intent of the original exposure. So yeah, I was going to actually ask if the OSCPA board was going to put together a response as well, and it sounds like you are.
Yes. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Yeah, thank you. And then Jason Orm, any comments too? I want to make sure you have an opportunity to. I know you've been instrumental in all this as well.
I agree with what's already been said. I like the way it's presented, and I like the approach. Thank you for allowing the comment.
Okay. Perfect. Any other questions, comments from the board? Okay, I think, yeah, we've got a couple very, very good suggestions from Adam that we can integrate into kind of a final draft. So I think that means we can move on to item C, which would be kind of an authorization to submit this comment to NASBA and the AICPA and the exposure drafts. And so I think what I'd be looking for would be a motion to submit the draft as presented with a couple of small grammatical edits as discussed.
So
moved. Second.
Okay, so I have a motion and a second from Haley. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those against? Hearing none. Abstentions? Hearing none. Motion passes. Okay. All right. Thank you, Martin. Appreciate it again for all the hard work there and leading us through that. know a lot of work goes into something like that. And like Haley said, I'm glad we're not one of the jurisdictions that kind of throw our hands up and didn't respond. It's important for us to participate in that.
Joe, if I may just take a moment, I just want to publicly sort of commend Martin or thank Martin for being a really rallying force around finding unity among all of the jurisdictions. He has a lot of connections, and because of how knowledgeable he is about our rules and what a lot of other states are doing, you know, he really is, I think, going to help solidify and move forward this agenda. And it goes back to kind of our strategic, you know, initiative of wanting to lead and not, you know, be stuck in the herd. And Martin's really taken that to heart and is doing a really exceptional job of that. And it was fun to be able to witness that last week. So thank you, Martin.
Well, it's very kind of you to say. It's it's fun. It's not easy. It's a tough environment. There is a group of EDs that I am starting to work with, very quietly, just with setting, quite frankly, our own jurisdiction hats aside, just trying to figure out how do we navigate that space given that jurisdictions are in different places and come up with a solution, because we're really worried about the timing, because we know we can't stop the train of the different jurisdictions moving stuff. And the fact that we don't have an embraced national solution yet is really starting to worry some of us. So I will do as much as I can to support that space. And I appreciate, Haley's comments and, quite frankly, Joe's support for allowing me to do that and giving me that freedom. So really appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you, Haley, for doing that. And Martin, just to echo Haley's comments. And it's just really nice to know, both of you at the NASBA meeting last week, just knowing Oregon is in good hands and well represented under your leadership, as well as Haley's, especially coming with your new role at NASBA as well. It's exciting that you're there. So congrats on that too, Haley. All right, moving on to item 5D, logistics preview for the board, OSCPA, OAIA joint town hall. That will also be a board meeting, which is Friday.
Yes.
This Friday. Yeah.
So just a couple of quick things to make sure that while I have everybody's attention to kind of get us through the logistics side, right? So we're, again, bless you, thank you, OSCPA, using OSCPA resources for this event. Originally, when I sent out a calendar hold, I had a majority of the board responding that they would attend the town hall, which means that from a public meeting perspective, it needs to be noticed as a board meeting. We have gone through the public meeting steps. Actually, most of them. I have 3 out of 4 completed, of those steps completed for Friday morning. What it means for you, though, is you do need to, and I will send you a separate email, please pay attention to it if you haven't seen it already, if you're an OSCPA member or not, but I will want to make sure that you know that since I think all of you are planning on webcasting in as opposed to going to the actual OSCPA site, you do need to actually register through OSCPA to actually be able to participate. It can't be done via a link, via the normal Zoom link that we have our board meetings with. So I want to make sure that you know that so that you don't get surprised Friday morning that there is no working Zoom link if you were trying to use the Zoom link on Friday. So I will send it out to you this afternoon, making sure that if you haven't done so already, that you know exactly how to sign up for the webcast piece. There's no cost, but you do have to go through that process. The meeting hold, I believe, is from 8:30 to 11, but the actual meeting, the town hall itself, is a 2-hour event from 9 to 11. So I hope that helps. And Sherry, the moment I'm done here, my first call will be to Tana to do some logistics coordination, just to make sure that everything is lined up. And I'm also going to do a little bit more communications out to our licensees around this. Any questions around that?
Would anyone like me to go ahead and, jump to the office and have them registered so you don't have to?
I mean, sure, we can. I mean, if you're willing to do that, then I can just, kind of take a show of hands right now and figure out who all is, because I think there was only one person who did not respond to my original piece, but can I just do a quick show of hands on who's planning on joining on Friday? So I've got Haley, Megan, Raul, Joe. I've got Andrew as well. Doesn't count the word quorum, but it does mean, and Jason.
I'll be, I think I'll only be able to be there half the time though, I think.
Okay.
It's okay. It doesn't matter, Logan. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
For registration purpose, it doesn't matter. But even if we lose you, we still have quorum. So
Oh, I'm sorry, not speaking for that. I was speaking for the
Yeah.
registry.
Yeah.
So Haley, Megan, Raul, Joe, Andrew, Jason, and Logan. And what
Perfect.
we'll do is we'll just check to see if you're registered. If you are, then done. If not, then I'll go ahead and see that you're registered.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, that takes one item off my list to talk with Tona about right after this.
Okay.
All right, anything else regarding the town hall? Otherwise, I think look forward to seeing everybody in person on Friday. And with that, we'll move to item 6, announcements. So next meeting, as we just talked about, Friday, 9 a.m. I believe. Is that right?
We usually start at 8:30.
Is it 8:30? Okay, I have it at.
We have we
Okay,
set it on the 18th of December, right? Which is a Wednesday, I think.
Yeah, and then the next regular meeting would be December 18th is what we settled on, but the next best meeting is this Friday. So with that, I will call this meeting adjourned. It is now 12:57 p.m. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Perfect. Thank you, Joe. Thank you all.
Thank you.